pretty full group. We'll probably have some additional folks joining us over the next few minutes, but let us go ahead and begin. Again, my name is Dan Milford. I'm the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church here in beautiful San Antonio, Texas. I'm also the moderator of the Presbyterian Mental Health Network. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this important conversation on spiritual and mental health during the time of COVID-19. I'm deeply grateful to our steering committee, the steering committee of our network, for their leadership in pulling together this event, making it possible. I'm grateful to Tara Rolstad for moderating today's event, and to our three panelists for bringing their knowledge, wisdom, and compassion into this time of crisis for us. Finally, I'm grateful for all of you who are tuned in today. As we gather together, I'm grateful for the care and the love that you pour out into our world, the wealth of experience and wisdom that you bring to caring for others, and for your engagement with this event and with our network. We'll include a link for you to sign up to receive information from our network into the chat function as we continue forward. And we'll be hosting additional events in 2021 and would love to have you all be engaged for those as well. Let us take a moment to join together in prayer as we start. Let us pray. Holy God, we give you thanks for this day, for the wilderness that we find ourselves walking in, not because we enjoy every aspect of it, but because as we stop looking back over our shoulder to the Egypt of what we knew and look out into the wilderness into which you call us, we discover that your presence is already there. Your provision for us is already there. Your guiding hand for us is out in front of us. And so we pray that you would be with us as we gather together this day, as we listen, as we learn, as we are fed, and as we are sustained. Speak to us in and through and around the words of our panelists and moderator today. Help us as we share questions and listen for answers, that we may be renewed in our confidence of your guiding presence and your sustenance for us this day and throughout the days to come. In Christ's name.
Amen.
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 Well, I now have the pleasure of introducing to you Tara Rolstad. She is one of the members of our steering committee and is the founder of Shattering Stigma with Stories. And at that, I turn it over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled that you're all here and so happy that we get to have this conversation, a conversation that is deeply, deeply needed, and one that the Mental Health Network hopes is just the beginning of many conversations. A few quick housekeeping details before we get started. The first thing I want to do is let you know that we will be recording this session and making it available to people who registered and missed it. So if you are here, you are signaling you're okay with that, but you are certainly welcome to change your name as it's revealed on the screen, and mute and turn your video off, which actually is the next thing I'm going to ask you all. If you would both mute yourself and turn your video off, that will make the sound quality better for all of us as we move forward in our discussion today. And if anyone comes in late, our producer, Brian Ellison, will be helping them, and any of you that are stragglers on the muting and the stopping of the video, he will help you by doing it for you. So we're going to start that way, and I want you to know that we will be taking questions as we go forward, and so be holding on to those questions, thinking about them. And from this point forward, we are going to ask that you not use the chat function for anything except submitting questions you'd like us to answer at the end of our time together. That way, the member of our committee who is tracking those questions for me and helping to sort them and bring them forward to me at that point can keep them all straight, because they're going to go by very quickly. And so even though we're just having you use chat just for submitting questions, please bear with us and have patience, because there may be a lot of them and they will go by very quickly. So we'll get to as many of them as we can, but we might miss some. Now, during the program, if you have technical difficulties, this is very important. I will not be able to help you. It is unlikely that our panelists will be able to help you, but Brian Ellison, our producer, might be able to help you. So that is the other completely permitted use of the chat function, is to go over there and click down on the little menu and find Brian Ellison, and you can submit technical questions to him and he will try and help you. Because as I said, I will not be able to, even if you're my mom and you have forgotten your passwords again. So now, at this point, I would like to welcome our panelists. We are blessed to have 3 folks with us today that will be struggling through this conversation with us, a conversation that we all need to have, as I said, and we're not expecting them to have all the right answers. We are definitely just asking them to share their hearts with us, their deep expertise and their insight. So I would first like to welcome Dr. Jerry Cannon, who is head of staff at C.N. Jenkins Memorial Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're glad you're here. We also have with us Dr. Valerie Lipscomb, who is ruling elder and clerk of session at Kirkwood Church in Bradenton, Florida. Hello. And finally, we have Dr. Bridget Piggue, who is the director of spiritual health at Emory University Hospital, Midtown in Atlanta, Georgia. So panelists, if you would, just in turn, give us a couple of minutes of who you are, how you spend your time, what your work is, and what interest or experience you have in this topic of mental health. Dr. Cannon, I'm going to call on you first because I started with you.
All right, thank you so much. Hello, y'all. Thank you for being a part of this time as we talk and get to learn more about the will of God for our lives as it relates to just being a whole person, and particularly on the areas of mental health. Bring you greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina. That's what you see in the background, but as I've already introduced myself, I am a fan of life and Krispy Kreme donuts, and this is how I'm doing with my mental health. The light comes on between 6 and 10 every evening and every morning. The reason I say that is because the same light that illuminates at Krispy Kreme, I think we have to begin to shine on persons to be holistic with their health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So I'm hoping to learn, but don't mind sharing what I can share as a pastor here in Charlotte for 28 years, but ordained ministry for 32. And just working with people and working with myself. I do not apologize for having a therapist, and I check in no less than twice a year for no less than 8 sessions just to keep my mental health. The other part of my balance is that I have a cadre of folk who don't know church, don't know Jesus, and they keep me balanced. So I don't surround myself with like people all the time. That helps me keep my mental health. So I'll pass the baton on.
Tara, do you want me to go next?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Valerie Lipscomb. Thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you for asking me to be a part of it. I am a professor of literature at the University of South Florida here in Sarasota, and I ought to have the beach in the background because here in Bradenton, the proximity to the beach is a big thing for us. I went on session at Kirkwood Presbyterian and became clerk of session. just in time for the pandemic. So it is just so fun to be a new ruling elder during this time. Not what I thought. I thought I understood why God was calling me to serve on session at this time, and I was so wrong about the why. So I'm finding that out as we go along, and to be here during this time. So my interest in mental health stems from experience with extended family members, and also from 25 years as a college professor. So my dealing with my students and how many of my students now need mental health services. That number has been rising, particularly in recent years. So I was asked to participate today, not because of any mental health expertise, but to offer the perspective of a lay leader, which I'm happy to do.
To which I would say any family member of a person living with a mental health issue has expertise that is very valuable. Thanks, Valerie. Dr. Piggue.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bridget Piggue. I serve as the Director of Spiritual Health at Emory University Hospital, Midtown. I've been here in this particular role and another right before this over 22 years at Emory now. I serve also as an adjunct professor at Candler School of Theology as well. Recently, well, I'm a CPE supervisor for those of you who are familiar with CPE and what it means to really work hard to challenge yourself in crisis situations. We're primarily at the hospital, but they are at other institutions. And pretty much we work with spiritual leaders for the most part that have, and lay leaders as well, who are trying to understand why they do what they do for the most part, what informs their spiritual care, what informs from their past, their history, their relationships, major life events, your faith development and construction, how all of that continues to impact who you are, who you continue to become. And so that has been my goal and passion, is for leaders to be well and healthy, because our level of influence with other people will certainly be translated and transformed into the relationships we have and into what we teach, the particular things we focus on. And if you're familiar and you are aware of what drives you, then your followers have the best chance if you are an integrated self. So that type of work, I love what Pastor Cannon, he said he's not ashamed of therapy. That's great, because I think every leader really needs to understand where they begin and those who they help, where they end, where the line is, so that you're offering the best for them. I've also recently done some doctoral work that will inform some of my answers, and all my years in CPE has helped me to bring together a conversation with psychology, theology, and the sciences to get a really good picture of how these things impact and are held in our bodies. And so your bodies are more than just this physical, but every part of you is open and vulnerable and has to be considered in any mental health pursuit. So that's how I'll introduce my passion.
I love that. Thank you all again for being with us today. One little tip that may be helpful for those of you who are watching is that if you have your Zoom set to see all of the little faces, that's probably going to be difficult to really see the panelists as they're answering the questions. So if you go up to the little boxes in the upper right hand corner, I have no idea what direction I'm pointing for all of you, but that's where it is for me, upper right hand corner of your screen, and you select speaker view, that will keep it so that you can see the person who's speaking better, and may make it more helpful to understand kind of as we're going on. And just a reminder for those of you who may have come in as we were making the introductions, we will be using the chat function today just for submitting questions that you may have that we will hopefully be able to get to at the end of the program. So let's start this conversation. This year, we have already lost more than 200,000 people to this COVID-19 pandemic. And in the middle of everything that has brought with it, we're also experiencing the outcry and the unrest from the brutality and violence on our Black and Brown communities. That's where we are, and that's what we're all living under and with. So the first question I'm going to direct to Dr. Piggue. Talk to us, Dr. Piggue, about how the trauma of quarantine and everything else that's going on in our country, how that trauma may be affecting us, affecting our bodies and our brains at the same time.
Thank you, Tara. Well, I'll pick up on the last statement I made about the doctoral work and my interest in how trauma affects the body. And so it's pretty timely for me. There's this issue of disembodiment that too often, even prior to COVID, let's just think about our lives. We kind of live in disembodied ways quite often because we don't see our bodies as actually living, actually human beings. We often consider our bodies or ourselves a brain here. We call it maybe mind, and we talk about spirit, but the physical part of us, we seem to just kind of carry around. So it's not humanized in some ways. And this is how I've researched and studied. And the neuroscience that I utilize in my conversations kind of helps to give us a picture of how we map experiences that actually are held very particularly in our body. You have to think of it as like your body as a script, and there are messages written there, and they sit there. And when they come in contact, we might talk about it like being triggered by familiar type of energy or experiences. That which the messages that are inside of you get triggered, and they're either compounded negatively or positively based on your level of understanding about the messages that rest there. There's like a mapping, and I give this little example, and I'll try to go quickly because I wanted the other panelists to be able to speak. But this example of if you're driving in a car and you approach a tunnel, and you actually start to duck when you approach the tunnel as if your body's going to hit the tunnel, but your car is approaching it, you're not going to hit it. But what that helps to show, a very small example, is how we map things around us. Like your car becomes a part of you. That which you are most engaged and involved with becomes a part of you. Messages from history are actually etched in your body. So when you are thinking of this mental health piece and our ways of thinking about ourselves, you have to think body, mind, spirit, and all of it is working together. So when you're thrown into a crisis type situation like we're in, people are going to respond differently. For instance, those who are alone, who may be used to being alone, it might not affect them one way or the other, being quarantined. Others might see it as a limitation and an annoyance and something that is deeply disturbing. And then there are others who are in groups who might they might be overstimulated at this point, and adults who are used to talking to adults who have to now talk to children all the time and do certain things. There's a disorientation occurring in your body. And so based on past experiences, you may enter into grief. You may enter into depression because you're going to need what's familiar here. So knowing what that's about is really important in terms of gaining a deeper understanding about what drives us. And there are rituals, there are ways to have conversations. If you actually see your body as human and alive, you can actually engage and start to journal and create opportunities to risk conversations that sometimes we never have with ourselves because we don't know how to be with ourselves. I'm going to just stop right there because I feel like I have talked a lot, and I'll join back with my panelists as they, if you like. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And maybe we'll have time to come back to what some of those ways are that we can begin to have those conversations with ourselves. I think that would be interesting. Our brilliant producer, Brian, has reminded me that if you have a question that you want to submit that maybe you don't want everyone to see, you go into the chat box, you click on the little drop-down menu where the names are, and you choose Bertram Johnson, who is my colleague on the Mental Health Network, along with many of the members who are already on the call. But Bertram is my question sorter and provider. So if you've got a question that you want to be kept private or not seen by the whole group, you just go in there and select Bertram's name and submit the question that way.
Tara, can I say one more thing? Because I know I didn't mention specifically Black and brown bodies, which are very important to me, communities that are being impacted right now in the trauma. The country is experiencing trauma because there's a particular orientation that the country has had that is suddenly thrown into disorientation. However, the different groups that are experiencing these different things, I like to use for people who are in pastoral care, they might know the term family systems theory. And if you think of the country as a system, and there was this balance, this homeostasis, they call it, this balance we had. And all of a sudden, if one place in the system changes, the entire system is forced to identify who they are today in the disorientation. You can never go back to the orientation again. And so there's this this shakeup that's occurring, but the people who, Black and brown people, have had written in the scripts of their body some trauma behind this particular type of oppression. And we have to think too, on the other end, those who oppress or who might be entitled or empowered or supreme in their thinking, there's a written script in their bodies equally. And until new information starts to come forward, what's familiar will start to be grieved, even if it's not, well. So I just want to make sure that as a part of the conversation, what's written in bodies are all of this history, and there's a reckoning that has to take place when you're going to shift to any other help.
I think that's a brilliant analogy to compare our whole society to this family system. And I think that disorientation speaks so directly to what so many of us are feeling, no matter where we stand or who we are. I love that. Now, you've talked a little bit about trauma. Some of the experts and you've spoken, Dr. Piggue, already about classifying what we're all experiencing as grief. I'd love to hear from all three of you, and I'll start with you, Valerie. How do you each view the difference between grief and trauma and depression, and when we or someone that we're helping might need professional help sorting through that or dealing with that? How do you look at that? Grief, trauma, depression?
I can speak most clearly to grief, and I really think that it's helpful to us to see what's happening through the lens of grief and grieving, because that is some part of everyone's life at some point or another. If you live long enough, you will experience that kind of loss. And the positive about it for us right now is that we have models for dealing with grief in a healthy manner. While we have this unprecedented societal event, we have a framework for moving through it, and moving through it perhaps in a healthy way. It's been sustained trauma for all of us now for months, but also acute trauma for each of us at various times. And as far as how to move through it and when to think about professional guidance, I know that as we go through grief, there are times when you can get stuck in that process, right? You can get stuck at a particular stage, and you might see that you aren't moving on, that you aren't necessarily dealing with it in a healthy manner. But also, of course, when one can't function, right? When you realize that you've sat down on your spiritual journey, or in taking care of your mental health. I think the focus on grief really can help us, give us a way forward through this crisis, however long it might last.
Great, thank you. Dr. Cannon, how about you? How do you sort through all of this when you're working with others or for yourself?
Sure, and I thank you. Let me pick up on what Dr. Valerie has said. The grief picture is real for us, particularly if we are in church world, post-pandemic, post-quarantine, pre-pandemic, post-quarantine. The church has been that place for when you experience grief. It was a safe space. It was a safe community, nurturing, but we haven't been able to do that. I had the unfortunate responsibility of eulogizing a 93-year-old member back in March and a 99-year-old member in May. But in both of those situations, they were graveside. And these were persons who the church would have celebrated their life and just really come around the families. But that was absent. And so those families still have a sense of emptiness. And I think that is one of the challenges that we have to begin to embrace when we talk about the mental breakdown, for me, for parishioners, for people in the community, is that somebody there, and I've had several members who have passed where the family members only got a chance to give those parting words when the nurse held the phone to their bedside because of COVID, and they could not have been with them. And I, as a pastor, can't go make that personal what I would normally, that home visit with them because of COVID. So now I'm talking to them on the phone. But as we know, a lot of times in church world is that ministry of presence that we can't do. I mean, I did a funeral on yesterday, and literally after doing the service at the funeral home, we did the interment because I couldn't go to the cemetery because of restrictions there. And so there's a lot of things you can't do now that normally were those I would call segments and those aids that would help people go through a process. And that's been totally interrupted. So it's caused some major adjustments on all of our parts. And but I'm going to go back to something Dr. Bridget said, but go ahead. If I didn't answer that question, okay, I'll shift it. But let me pause there.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, because she was mentioning something very important in terms of the lens to which we are now having to see the world. And a lot of people talk about the PTSD. In the African American church, we've looked at the post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And so now we're looking at things through the lens where we're talking about systemic racism, where African Americans have had to deal with that stress pre-pandemic. And now you have a pandemic on top of that. So the mental anguish with that, and the church not being open for you to release, for you to be affirmed. And so those layers are piling one on top of another. And I think that will need, Dr. Bridget, some clinical research, some surveys, and I don't know if it will require, medications, but this is a real challenge that we don't even know how to begin to prepare for this time next year. So I just want to pause there and say those things.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think what I'm hearing from you is more disruption to some of the things we normally depend on to move us through that state, those stages of grief, to move us through that experience. And even those things have been taken from us in many ways right now.
Yes.
I'd like to, and just for everyone to know, including the panelists, I am sometimes calling on the panelists just to help avoid that super awkward stepping over of each other in a Zoom call. But also, if any of the panelists want to interject something, by all means, that's completely okay. I'm just trying to to keep us as unawkward as possible, at least with me around. So let's go back to really a really specific answer from each of you briefly. You've got somebody sitting with you, whether it's a parishioner or a client or a friend, and they're really struggling with what's going on right now. How would you help them evaluate? Is this something they can continue to discuss with a spiritual leader or a friend, or is it time for someone else to help, somebody of a more professional nature in the mental health field? And I'm going to go right back to you, Dr. Cannon, to start with that, and then we'll move down.
Sure, thank you. And generally, it's the same kind of screening that I would do normally. You know, how can I help? What can I, as a spiritual leader, as a pastor, offer to you in your situation? And if those things can be identified to say, you know, hey, Reverend, hey, preacher, you know, this is what I'm struggling with, you know, in terms of the word of God or spiritual development, then I'm going to stay in my boundaries. But if it is outside of my boundaries, I will say, not as a disclaimer, but really as an offer to them and to myself, you know, can we look for outside resources? And I don't have any problems and I encourage, you know, other clergy and other clergy persons who are watching to don't feel as though you have to be a one-stop shop and try to solve it all. But yeah, I would ask them to help me identify, you know, what is it that we're looking at? What would not an answer, but what would some suggestions be that you would be interested in receiving? So I would approach it that way.
Thanks. Thank you. Dr. Piggue, how about you?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important is language. Sometimes this feeling of helplessness that people encounter in these kinds of situations, they don't have words for it. They're just experiencing something so unfamiliar. So sometimes helping people to find language, just literally language, to can feel comforting and grounding. I'm going to do kind of this assessment is to kind of see where people are. We have in CPE what's called a feeling wheel. Some of you may have heard of that before. And when people can't name anything, we might pull out the feeling wheel and say, see if there's a feeling there. Y'all seen the little faces and stuff like that. Literally, sometimes just a grounding for folks is to name what's happening, because it's so ambiguous. That's a scary place to live in, that which is undefined. That's always scary. And so being able to let people talk through what's going on as well, like very particular, like not cutting it off and just say, oh, don't think about it, that's bad. Not cutting people off, but allowing them to get it out so they can find the naming. And then asking about like how they can be compassionate enough to themselves to know that if things are triggered so much, do they have any practices or ways that has brought some type of comfort or soothing experience for them. I think when it gets to the point that people are unable to find any relief, they're maybe obsessing, and they have recurring ways of talking about things that never subside. They're very angry to the point that their body is being impacted. You know, all of those things are very important, and we might be a covenant partner with them to get on the computer, find the resources. Let's go through looking for therapists who might specialize in certain things. But sometimes walking with people to that point is really helpful. So those are a few things I might add.
I love that. I think sometimes offering to help them find that person and even make the phone call for them can be such a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think hopelessness, I'm guessing, might also be one of those
Mm-hmm.
flags. If
Yep.
a person is feeling very hopeless, that also might be a time that you'd want to bring in extra help. So we've talked about grieving, and many of us are familiar with the 5 stages of grief as defined by Kubler-Ross. And the committee has discussed the fact that recently a grief expert, David Kessler, has added an additional stage to those stages of grief, and that's the stage of meaning. And I'd love to hear from each of you how you personally are finding meaning in this time. Anybody that is ready?
Or you're saying for ourselves?
For yourself, how are you finding meaning in what has been a dumpster fire of a year, shall we say?
You know what's interesting? I've had conversations and they have really been varied with different people and on different topics. But I think because of my focus in ministry in particular, and then my spirituality, I've asked the question, what was it about this particular event? I'll say for Black and brown people, and then others who have awakened in some ways, and some who have been enraged in some ways about what's going on now. And then COVID-19. What is 2020 spiritually? What's happening in the heavenlies? What did we miss to this point for the eruption right now? How do we as spiritual people look at this in systemically, more comprehensively, rather than very tunnel vision? Because those of us who have been existing in a tunnel, we're very disoriented right now. But if we can think systemically, what has been occurring, would this have just been expected, that you can't go any further in a particular way? You can't keep moving through eras and generations and stay the same. You cannot. And so my meaning making, me being more focused on how am I going to stay well when I can feel helpless, or there's nothing that I can do to just change it outright. But again, these changes are going to be systemic, and over time, just like they got this way, right? And so I started to think about, what can I do as a person, one person that can make a difference? I think that if there was a mother crying about, like, oh, my children, they're going to grow up in this world a particular way. Well, I want to affirm that if you determine to speak to new generations of people, and you are sowing love, and you are making sure health is there, then you're changing the generation right now. How can I help you to make meaning of never diminishing your interfacing and your lessons to the next generation of people who can make our world what we want it to be? Like that type of thing. How do you get involved? I'm going to sign up to be a poll worker so I can be, involved in a certain way. If I'm not on the front line, this is what I can do. So searching for what I can do, what I can offer, and never diminishing, that every little bit helps and counts. So those are some of my musings, but there are many, many more.
I love it. Okay. I think that's important, searching for what we can do.
What you can do.
How about you, Dr. Valerie? What are you pulling out of this for yourself?
Well, I've heard an awful lot of people talking about wanting to get back to normal. And I think it's important to confront and realize that we aren't going to go back to normal. And again, for me, the grieving process and dealing with it as a grieving process is a positive way of looking at it. We are assured that the Holy Spirit will be with us as we grieve, and will walk alongside us and comfort us. And at the same time, when you work through a death or a loss, you know that you aren't going to go back to the way things were, that's not possible. Instead, you're going to go forward to what normal will become, and to incorporate what you've learned along the way, all of those kinds of the lessons, and that while pain is not something any of us would seek, right? It is something that we grow from. You watch your soul get stretched in the process. And while you might say, Lord, I don't want to be stretched. I would rather be small right here. Thank you. But the stretching is positive. In the long run, you see the gifts that come along with the stretching. It has given us a chance, I think, to pause as individuals and to look at where we are spiritually. Made us pause, perhaps, those of us who are super busy and go, moment to moment, without having that necessarily taking the time we should for that reflection. And then also as a congregation, right? I mean, thinking about the way we're doing ministry, and our pastor has been, I think, amazing at wanting to see all of this crisis as the possibility for reevaluation, for how we can reach new people, how we can reimagine how we reach people for the Lord.
Yeah, I think I've certainly had this thought. I know that's the perspective you come from, Dr. Lipscomb, as a family member with folks who've struggled with the mental health issues. That's absolutely my perspective as well. And I feel like once you've been down that road, you begin, the realization that normal is not coming back becomes easier. And that's probably true with any difficult thing we go through. Although I have to admit, there have been multiple times this year where I've said, Lord, I am done stretching. All done. Can I just done with the stretching?
And
How about
Charles,
you,
can I say something real quick? And in the normal piece, or Valerie, the normal for who and what that normal wasn't the best experience for everyone, but it was familiar, right? Mm-hmm. The familiarity, sometimes even in difficulty, just because we know it and we're afraid to be stretched and to move forward is something we have to reflect on. Normal for who and what. And do we want to go back to that really, or what do we want for the future?
We hope to envision and grow and move forward as a culture and as people of God. Absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Cannon, where is your meaning coming from right now?
Thank you. And I guess, I don't know if I'm an anomaly, but I'm going to say it anyway. I am the youngest of 7 children, and my mother is 100 years old, and I'm going to see her today, like every day, by 3:30, and we're going to have dinner. Now, what she reminds me at 100 is that her oldest brother, died in the Spanish flu in 1919. Okay. Wow. She reminds me also is that she had a sister who was gravely ill with a whooping cough, and she reminds me of my own siblings who had to get vaccinated for polio. So when we talk about health pandemics, she's lived through them. And so as Dr. Bridget says, the normal for a lot of people has really been questioned. What is my normal? I grew up in the South. I sit on the curb in Kannapolis, North Carolina, and I watch the grand marshals of the Christmas parade in Kannapolis wear sheets and hoods. They were the Klan. That's my normal. My normal was the same Klan were the firemen for the volunteer fire department. So when the Black community and the homes caught on fire, the same Klan came to town to put the fires out. Now, some would say they set the fires, but the point is, the same people. So the normal in terms of dealing with the racism and that coming to light, dealing with the inequities when it comes to health, it's really been brought full circle in the sense that my normal has been the church. And what we're finding now is that, the people who have come through that same similar story that I have, African Americans in the South, who remember, going to town, living under Jim and Jane Crow, and then seeing things change, but remembering and reminding, this is what I remind my children and my nephews and all, is that, look, this thing has not been that long ago. Don't get you know, anesthetized by the fumes. You know, you're going to live with racism. You're going to live with inequities. And the best you can do is to have a centering about yourself, not to be so totally thrown off of course with it. And we have to live that out. We have to say, you know, what is the piece that's going to keep us going? What is the word? You know, what is the spirit? What's the encouragement? And so my 100-year-old mama is my safe base, my home court. And I get there, I get recharged with her. And she reminds me, hey, there was a Corrine before there was Corona. So that's her name, Corrine. So my Corrine reminds me that you got to keep pushing through. You cannot give out. And then, yes, as a spiritual person, I strongly believe in the word that we preach and we teach, and we got to live out.
I'm grateful for the gift of your mama's perspective today. I am.
Thank you.
What a gift.
Thank you.
So our time is, as I knew it would, is moving quickly. And so this is the time where I challenge our panelists to a bit of a speed round, if you will, to we've got several questions left that I really want to get to and wrestle with. So I'm going to ask you for maybe your one or two best ideas, your one or two thoughts that come to mind when I ask these questions. And we've been talking on the big level, right? We've been talking on the systemic, the social level about all of this. Now I want to come down to a more individual level and a more congregational level or smaller community level. Talk to me about how you and your congregation have been struggling with the stress and the anxiety that has come in leading a congregation through a time when a congregation can't be a congregation the way they're used to, through church opening, church closing, canceling, quarantine, pandemic. How have you and your people been managing that stress and anxiety? What has worked and what hasn't worked?
I would talk really fast here because I just had my screen freeze up a minute ago, and there's a chance that can happen again. So while I know it's working,
yeah, go.
Yes, it has been pretty much unrelenting stress, right? For the constant worry over the mental and physical and spiritual health of the congregation, of our tireless pastors as well, the plain old peer pressure about opening, about masks, about social events, the isolation, the alienation, the unexpected conflict, people that I never thought I would be disagreeing with, and how we've always been able to basically come to consensus about things, and that was not necessarily the case over the past few months. So it's been very, very stressful, and particularly as a new leader, it's difficult to know the pulse of the congregation when we are so isolated from each other. And we were closed for 6 months, so we've only been worshiping in person again. We were closed. The building was closed. Let me be really specific. The building was closed. We worshiped online and we connected in other ways. And there were many, many blessings involved in that. But the disengagement then of some members as well, some who just sort of threw in the towel during that time, all of those things were very worrisome, and really a very difficult time for everyone in leadership. I know the staff and the pastors and everyone having to make decisions. So really difficult that way. So how have we coped? I think really focusing on relationship and the relationship we already had, making sure to prioritize and look at the relationship first. Sustaining the relationship is the most important thing. Also on just making sure to offer each other as much grace as we possibly can. constant prayer, the Zoom meetings to connect as much as it's not great, it is better than nothing. And humor. I think we were starting before we officially started talking about how important humor is. I have no idea how we would have gotten through all of this if we hadn't been able to joke our way through it so far. So
I love that. Thank you. Dr. Piggue, how about you?
The only thing I would add maybe to what Valerie has said is, because I would have said what a lot of things she said, because I'm encountering pastors on this end who can no longer be with to come to the hospital to help loved ones and do ritual there, and you know how funerals and all that have been impacted. I would just say if you can ask for special arrangements, you know, we make we've mediated work with electronic devices. Make that a Zoom where maybe people might be able to join in and see a loved one at the hospital if they, you know, not being able to touch or be with has been such a hard thing that we try to help in that way. Perhaps a special arrangement, since they won't let people come in, might be something you would think about to help with that area. That's the only thing I would add.
It's a fantastic idea.
If you have chaplains, that's even better if they're there. Okay.
I think that goes for a lot of folks who have older family members who they are separated from as well. Yeah. My mom lives in an adult foster home facility, and if I can ever get her to be able to use Zoom, the angels will literally break through and sing.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
quite positive of it, because thus far there's been no success in that area. Yeah. How about you, Dr. Cannon? What's your congregation been coping with and struggling with? How's it been? What's been working?
Okay, thank you. The last time we were in church together was March the 8th. So the second Sunday in March, and we have not, as a congregation, gathered. Now we started the Zoom, we started Facebook and YouTube like the third Sunday in March. So we've been communicating that way. But here's a question that I presented to our elders, our governing board, that I got from Mark Ramsey from the Ministry Collaborative Macedonia Ministry. Some of you know Mark. He told us to raise to our leaders, and I did this in March. I said, hey, what will the community say about us this time next year? Meaning that in March 2020, we began to wrestle with the question, what would the community say about C.N. Jenkins Memorial Presbyterian Church, Charlotte, North Carolina, in March 2021? Meaning that whatever we do between now and the time that there is a reopening is going to impact. It will either bring people to the building or it will not bring them to the building. And so that has directed our leadership, you know, tremendously. Now, the one thing that's really worked, but it's a lot of work on the pastoral staff, is that every morning, Monday through Friday at 7 a.m., there is a devotional prayer call. And Dr. Bridget, you're talking about people doing Zoom, and Sister Tara talking about your mom dialing in. We have a prayer line, and I pay the extra $3.99 per month, so you don't have to dial a code. And if you're watching this, I recommend the $3.99 because everybody's got a phone, but nobody can remember the 6-digit code. So let's go ahead and jump up to $4, and you dial directly. And there are more than 100 people every morning from all over dialing in for that 15, 20-minute prayer call. Now that goes to about 7:25, 7:30, and then we do the parking lot. And the parking lot is just what that means, church parking lot. You talk about anything and everything. You can pray, you can sing, you can joke, whatever. You can roast the preacher, but that is, you know, that's what happens in the parking lot. And that's kept us together. So literally, we are now, some members will say, we are more connected than what they were once a week. So now you really can, you know, stay at home, you know, in your pajamas or whatever you're in at 7 o'clock in the morning and connect with people you know. But that's really been kind of our saving grace, and I recommend that to anyone. Preachers, you know, if you want to do 7, I wish somebody would have told me, hey, dude, you can do this thing at 10:30. You don't have to get up all the time, but 7 a.m. it works. Thank you, Tara. I agree with
Yeah.
you.
The Lord knows that I should not be talking to anybody at 7 a.m.
Hallelujah.
That's not, God bless you. And be with you. And that's not good.
That's not good. All right.
I want to remind everyone that if you have questions that you want me to bring to the panelists, we'll be turning to that in a few minutes. And so you're welcome to submit. Please do submit those in the chat. They can be about anything we have or have not covered yet about mental health in the church and the people. And you can either submit that just to the group, or you can, in the drop-down menu, you can select Bertram Johnson and give him a question. And I just want to clarify that the parking lot conversations, Dr. Cannon, those are a phone conversation you're having?
Yeah, and basically
Okay.
we leave the prayer call line open, and my wife's a clergy, so she kind of moderates that, and she will sometimes expand on what I've said, but yeah, they can go, and it was so helpful, particularly during the George Floyd protests, that this was an area where people could just vent and say, I don't believe what I saw. When we talking about Breonna Taylor, it was just like an open line, and it was very therapeutic that now I can talk with a pastor, or I can talk with church leaders, and I can say, what the hell is going on? And we can be honest and open. So yeah, that parking lot conversation, it has been really, really a benefit to us.
I love that. It's low tech, and
Yeah.
the ability to have that conversation together really resonates with me. I know I have deeply missed that. And I want to say, just as an aside, to anybody in church leadership right now, but especially to the pastors that are on the call with us, I feel like it is almost impossible for you all to feel you have done your job well right now. You cannot pastor your people right now in the way that you have been trained and called to do. And I want you to hear that from a non-clergy person, that I am seeing that and I feel for you, and keep going and doing whatever you can. But if you're feeling that way, you are not alone, and that is a very real thing. I want to turn now to asking about what you have seen in your congregation, your community, in terms of specific mental health issues. I know many of us are aware that, the surveys have been done that over half of American adults right now are experiencing higher levels of depression and anxiety. And some of us are experiencing that maybe for the very first time. Some folks may be experiencing that on a level that is higher and more difficult than they've ever experienced before. What are you seeing in terms of specific mental health issues, either within church leadership or within your people, and how are you? What are you seeing, and what have you been helping people with, and specifically in that area?
Tara, you named all of the ones I would name. And unfortunately, some of that is ending in suicide because they're so alone. And some people cannot get to others. And that is what, in terms of us finding the best ways possible, thinking outside the box to offer ways of connecting with people that we may not have heard from in a long time. Anyone who comes to our mind, if you think, oh, they have people, just call them anyway and have something available, like what you're saying, Pastor Cannon and others, just to make the connection can make a difference. And that's what I would add as a quick answer, because you named pretty much the major issues. Also, maybe a feeling of being unstable in ways that they hadn't before. So I don't want to utilize the term feeling crazy, but it's really outside of themselves. So again, the grounding kind of exercises and practices, encouraging people to maybe in a best social distance, most healthy way, to get somewhere where nature, water, or something's going to speak to their souls. Like even organizing that in certain ways, I don't think that's going too far. I think we need to put that extra effort in, because we've had places like parks and national parks, places, with bodies of water that are available. And you can even create a rotation and say, hey, you all go out there then, so that you're not close to each other here. Go that far. It's worth it.
I love that. I absolutely, yeah. Being outside is so important and grounding, as you said. Valerie, what have you been seeing with your people?
I think lots more incidents of whatever they struggle with already, right? And it ends up being exacerbated by this situation. My husband's a family practitioner, so he sees an awful lot of self-medicating happening out there, and a lot of his patients' liver enzymes apparently are up from during the past 6 months. I'm sorry to say that seems to be a trend nationwide. And, watching people, my students and such, just shut down and just not be able to move forward in their daily routine. So as far from a congregational standpoint, I'm not privy to a lot of that, but I also know in general there have been many urgent pastoral care calls over the past few months.
I would just speak to, thank you. One of the things that our congregation has intentionally embraced and welcomed persons who have dealt with substance abuse. And so that's a part of our DNA. So we were intentionally trying to make sure that the 12-step groups continue to meet, even though we haven't welcomed, the physical return of that here in the building, but we do have our network going. So, that has always been some of my personal concerns, that we don't overlook that segment of our community that has already dealt with some struggles. But just to let those sisters and brothers know that, hey, the church still cares about you, and we're grateful. We're grateful that they have a lot of our elders and deacons who have overcome and no longer in active addiction are now intentionally reaching out to help persons who may be struggling. So that is real. That is real.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't, but you're right. It is very real. And you may not each have an answer to this, but to get even more specific, for those families that you have been working with or that that already were living with perhaps a more serious mental illness, folks with serious depression, or maybe folks who live with a bipolar disorder or a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or something, I'm wondering if you've seen any trends with those families and how they have been dealing with those more serious issues in their families, and if there are ways that you've reached out to them specifically or differently than you have for the other folks.
Well, I would say that our associate pastor works directly with our youth and young adults, and she's brought it to our attention during staff meeting. This was, really around the time we started doing the Zoom schools, or what do you call it, distance learning, that some of our teenagers were just dealing with a lot of emotional trauma. And I only bring that up so maybe there may be somebody who's watching who has a good solution, a good recommendation. But that is a segment I would ask us not to overlook. That is our teenage population. We assume that, okay, you can do the TV, the computer, the tablet, and whatnot, but that's still not connecting, as we are relational people. That's how we're wired, and so there's no substitute for that. So I kind of put that out almost as a question. What do you do now, Sister Tara, with that group? In addition to quote adults.
Yeah, I think, I'm the mother of 3 teenagers who have been in my house now with me for months, and they don't call it distance learning. They generally call it torture. And I can say as a parent that I've noticed, I don't think they can put words to the fact that they think they like to connect electronically, so this should be easy for them. They think, as you said, Dr. Cannon, we assume that they're comfortable with that. And in fact, I don't think it's any less profoundly isolating for them than it is for us. And they may have even fewer words to put to that experience. And so I think that probably falls back to the disorientation that Dr. Piggue was talking about earlier. I think they definitely feel that way. And I have an amazing church family and an amazing set of youth pastors that shepherd them, and they're not connecting. It's not. So I don't have an answer to that. But I could second your request to not forget those kids and not assume they're okay, because many of them really may not be okay. And I know even just from the behavioral health specialists in my area, they are already seeing increasing rates of suicide in our young people. So I've seen one question come up that I think is something we're all dealing with right now in one way or another, and that's a question from Abigail about how specific ways of addressing the increase in animosity and anger that we may all be feeling for varying different reasons. Any words on anger?
I want to connect that to some things that I said earlier. That, well, two things. One is, I think this is where you as a pastor or lay leader, it's really an opportunity for affirming and blessing those who are able to name that they're angry, or and actually explore with them the reality of what their experience is. I think the thing from earlier is to do that, though, asking people to connect with what message is connected with the anger and the animosity. Sometimes getting clear about, if you could name what's behind, like what you're angry at or what the animosity is. And they might not even want to name it because it could be rooted in something they don't even want to look at in themselves. Sometimes they might be surprised. But it also might take a lot of digging. And this is where if you can't get to even naming it and it just stays fueled, then this is where walking a person into a therapeutic type of relationship is going to be important, because you want them to be healthy. Their blood pressure could be going up. They could be angry because they're mad or they're scared or they feel wronged. And so if there's no action or ritual that can address it, then it really needs to be taken to another helping relationship, because it can be destructive to them, and if not checked, possibly to others. And so you have to take it seriously.
I think that's so important. I know that I've learned so much about the physical impacts of our mental health, and how folks who live with serious mental health issues like long-term depression can have heart disease consequences.
Yes.
Our bodies are going to reflect that back to us in very real and measurable ways. And I think many of us will be seeing a lot of that play out over the next few years. I'm going to add into that question about anger, as Valerie and Dr. Cannon, you think about this, fear. I mean, obviously they're closely connected, anger and fear. And we've had a question talking about people who are now experiencing fear in ways that they have never experienced before, whether it's fear about the virus, fear about systemic unrest, fear about the election.
Mm-hmm.
Not only how are you looking at anger and fear, but what are some ways that you help people turn towards self-care when they're feeling that?
Did you direct it toward a person?
Well, I hadn't let Jerry and Valerie answer that question yet, but
Yeah.
while they're thinking, if you've got something, jump in.
No, I'll wait. I'll wait.
No, jump in, jump in.
That we've stumped them. We've stumped them because we're all angry right now.
Well, honestly, some of what I just said is creating, like, if you can covenant like with yourself or a partner to actually write down the kind of questions that I'm actually pointing to here, because it can start crafting a self-care plan that when things start to get triggered or you feel them, can you count them as an alarm or an alert that something is at unrest in your body and you care enough? This also is the covenant with your body, with her. And I tell people to actually start to use a pronoun to talk about her or him, how you identify, to actually dialogue. And if you can create the covenant there, then you'll start like loving on, pampering, walking with this very human being that is you, and talking through what's actually the matter. And if you can write it down, associate it with the messages, start to do the harder work of talking about it. I want to make sure that I'm getting to your question. Then you have a pathway into ritual practices. If prayer is something you do, but sometimes our families have taught us um, how to appreciate particular types of ritual, like I said, outdoors. There are baths. There's actually spiritual work that you're washing things away and attachments to you that don't feed and nourish what you want to be. And so being able to write those things down and then practicing what is meaningful to you, because what is ritually meaningful to me could be very different for you. I might like the water, you might like the mountains. I might like salt, you might like oil. And so what things speak to every sense gate you have that still is acceptable in your Christian tradition, because some people would start to think, oh, that sounds a little weird. But actually, all of this stuff is in your Bible, pretty much everything I've said. How do you grasp that? But you have to have the language. You have to have the message associated. So, and then you have to see yourself as living so that you can dialogue, so that you're caring like you would a baby. You know, we take care of babies. They have the best food, the best water. We protect their ears and everything that goes inside, because somehow we think that something does impact their internal selves that's integrated. Then all of a sudden we give it up when we get older, and we don't give ourselves the same thing. But if this type of intentionality can actually, be observed, you will start to comfort and minister and affirm what's beautiful inside of you, so that you can get to where the place you need to be, and release and dislodge some of what might be toxic. But you have to be willing to actually acknowledge it.
And it occurs to me that those are not practices that come easily to a lot of people. They're not practices that many of us have had to engage in before. And that may be an opportunity for a lot of churches to intentionally engage in some education to lead people through, how do we build these skills for ourselves?
What did they mean? Like, we might even need to go back and research, what was this for in the Bible when they had hyssop and oil to cleanse and purge and incense? What was that all about? There is spiritual energy that doesn't need to rest on us, that's just sitting here, and we never purge or cleanse it so that we can get at what is healthy and whole for us. Or we're weighted down with stuff that we don't take the time to familiarize ourselves with. And it's not weird. It's all in your Bible.
And Dr. Bridget, I would add to that, it's a Sabbath. We are really called to take a sabbatical. And I hope and pray that is something that maybe Dr. Valerie, you can speak to. But, I sense this as not being just a closed door kind of time for the church, but an intentional Sabbath to pull back, let the land rest, that we're not going to plant seeds, we're not going to harvest, we're just going to let the dirt rest. And while it's resting, we're going to rest, you know? So, and I pause there.
Mhm.
Let
Well,
me, oh, go ahead, Dr. Valerie.
So often when I've witnessed anger and fear, back to your question, it's related to a feeling of lack of control, right? That you're not in control of the situation. You're not in control of the pandemic, and this is such an unusual situation that you don't know what's coming, and you feel like you should have control, right? You're reacting to that loss of control. I really think it's important to just keep going back to the basics of our faith. We're not in control. We're not supposed to be, right? And to remind ourselves that it is God who is in control, that is the foundation, and that it's okay to acknowledge and accept our fear and our anger and our normal human response to that, but to just keep recentering ourselves in our faith.
I think
Yeah,
that
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that illusion of control is the favorite human illusion, I think.
Yes, yes. My wife is doing a Zoom class. She worked through a book, The Artist's Way, and I can't remember the author of it, but she personally found that it would be very therapeutic for her. So now she has another group that she's doing, and part of that is just journaling and writing down those fears, those trigger points of anger. And trust me, it has been a tremendous help in our relationship, but also while we have this, forced upon us sabbatical, I would just encourage more people to, look at resources that are going to cause you to intentionally move to meditation, move to yoga, move to some kind of a release point. I think maybe somebody said, Dr. Bridget or somebody was talking about this to nature thing. If you like the mountains, you like the ocean, you like trails, get outside, recognize that, I don't know why all these squirrels coming on my front porch. I mean, before this pandemic, I didn't see rabbits and squirrels. Now they're ringing the doorbells like, yo, dude, want to come out and play? It's like, no. But, nature is just overcome. I mean, I'm just observing nature more now. So, I think that find your release point. For me, the anger, it's not going to subside, but you can deal with it differently.
Thank you. And that book, The Artist's Way, somebody put the title in the chat, and then it would be a fantastic introduction to some of those practices for people who haven't been there before. Someone needs to mute. And I am going to turn us maybe a little bit of a left turn to what will be probably one of our final questions. Some racial and ethnic communities, we've talked about experiencing the traumas of COVID-19 and racial discrimination, and also the threat of ICE detentions all mixed together. So what would any of you recommend to the church to ministering folks who are in that kind of triad of lack of control, racial discrimination, COVID-19, ICE detention, and immigration issues?
We recently had a book group working through a wonderful book called Seeing Jesus in East Harlem. And a couple of things that I took away from that are the possibility of the church being a safe host for conversations and for difficult conversations. And then the power of personal testimony, the ability to allow and listen to, hear, acknowledge, affirm that personal testimony of what your life story has been, and to listen to that with love and ministry and understanding.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about that, Dr. Piggue or Cannon? I know we've talked a good deal about this, some of it.
I was wondering if you were talking specifically about being able to serve as a voice on national and social levels to make change and to never diminish the power that the church can have to actually do what Jesus commanded us do. You know, that is the work. And if we say we're about that, to not see our power as small, but to take the risk to be vocal and stand for change in those particular types of situations. I just don't have a lot of, my heart breaks for people, babies in cages taken away from their parents, and not just that, many things, but I just don't have any understanding or a lot of room for understanding about it. And so the church's witness in the world cannot be watered down in this way. So that's all I have.
Yeah. And I would say to the tribe to which I am apologist for, PCUSA, you know, unfortunately, there was a shout out by the president last night to some of your cousins. And you've got to be able to, you know, make that phone call to them to say that this is not the kind of life or the world we want to live in. And so we're going to have to, you know, put voice into action. And there's so many intentional ways for us to live out the gospel. That no, church is never going to go back the way it was, but nor will the people now being exposed to things go back the way we've been. So it's going to call a new kind of presence.
Thank you. Yeah. We have come to the end of our time nearly together, and I very much want to thank our panelists today. Thank you for sitting on the hot seat. Thank you for being willing to wrestle with these questions, very few of which have correct answers or any answers, but you have given us some beautiful insight and wisdom and perspective that we can all take with us into our day. So thank you all three so very much from all of us on the Presbyterian Mental Health Network. And I want to ask the audience now, if you would, at this point, you were asked when you registered, what do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to learn about when it comes to mental health, mental illness, and the church? If there are things that have come to your mind now that you would like to see us talk about in the future, as I said earlier, we are hoping to make this a regular conversation, starting perhaps in the new year. And so we are very open to your suggestions. We want to know what you want to learn and hear about. And I want to let you all know that we will be sending out in the next day or two a follow-up email to all of you that registered for the session today that will have some additional links with information on how you can stay in contact with the Presbyterian Mental Health Network, as well as some of the resources we talked about today and some of the resources that are available through the PCUSA in terms of mental health. And I would say to any of our panelists, if there are resources you spoke about today, or if you have any, thinking about you, Dr. PJ, if you have any handouts or things you use when you're helping people think through those helpful rituals that you talked about, share that, and we will share that with people as well. So again, thank you all. At this point, at one point I looked and we had well over 110, 120 people on the line with us,
Yeah.
which is amazing and fantastic, and speaks to how important this topic is for all of us. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to the chair and moderator of the Presbyterian Mental Health Network, to Dan Milford, to close us out for today.
Thank you very much, Tara. As we come to the end of our time together, I do want to reiterate my gratitude for Tara Rolstad, for Dr. Bridget Piggue, for Dr. Valerie Lipscomb, and for Dr. Jerry Cannon. Thank you all so much for your guidance and leadership for us today. Thank you again to everyone who's joined us today. It's great to have you with us. Some of you are already on our mailing list. Others are not. We've put the links back onto the chat stream. I noticed that Bertram and I uploaded the link for the sign-up form at about the same time. Sorry for the redundancy of that, but want to make sure you all have that. I also put up the link for the mental health ministries of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, or within that, the Compassion, Peace, and Justice Ministries. You'll find all kinds of great information through that part of the website. For the Presbyterian Mental Health Network, so the mission agency, CPJ side of mental health ministry is going to be developing content, gathering content, providing content for how to do mental health ministry, how to understand mental health. The Presbyterian Mental Health Network, which is bringing this webinar today, we're going to focus more on trying to help connect congregations, presbyteries, seminaries that are exploring mental health ministry and trying to develop models and ways of doing mental health ministries. We want to help be able to connect churches in different parts of the country that are trying to do similar types of ministry or ministry to similar kinds of populations, so that we can learn from each other and grow from each other and innovate better and faster by learning from one another. In the near future, we'll be launching a web page at pmhn.org, Presbyterian Mental Health Network, pmhn.org. That's not up just yet, but it will be soon. One of the things that we're looking for on that website will be stories, about 300 to 500 words, stories about why mental health ministry is important to you, why it matters to you. And we'd love for you to submit a story if you would like to do so. It needs to be about 300 to 500 words, and you can submit it to information@pmhn.org. information@pmhn.org. If you do so, we will get back to you with editing needs or anything else to make it work within the parameters that we're setting up. Finally, we'll be sending out a follow-up email soon to everyone who is registered for this event. I believe we've recorded this, and we'll be able to send you the link to the recording and be able to send you the links that were put into the chat, the link for the information@pmhn.org if you would like to do a 300 to 500 word story about why mental health ministry is important to you. And I hope you'll look forward to more events like this as we launch 2021 events in the coming year. We thank you so much for your time and welcome your participation with us in this critical ministry for the life of the church. Thank you all so much. Let us close with prayer. Holy God, we give you thanks again for Tara Rolstad, for Dr. Bridget Piggue, for Dr. Valerie Lipscomb, and for Dr. Jerry Cannon. We give you thanks for the time and the wisdom that they have shared with us, for the opportunity to gather together and strive to learn how to care for ourselves and care for our communities as we walk through a very disorienting and grief-inducing and challenging time. We pray that you would help us to have the courage to stop looking over our shoulder toward Egypt, for what was, for what we knew, for what was familiar, and look instead into the wilderness into which you call us, a wilderness that may seem desolate and barren to us at first, but into which we will discover your presence, into which we will discover your provision for us, into which we will discover your transforming love and care, teaching us how to be a different kind of people. And so we pray that you would guide us forward into this wilderness, and that you would give us courage and energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. Amen. Thank you all very much.